She was a ghost in her own life, a woman whose voice was a source of cruel mockery, a whispered joke in the halls of power. They called it shrill, too high, an unladylike instrument of a woman who dared to speak in a man's world. For years, she was told to be silent, to sit down, to accept her fate as a mere footnote in history. But what her detractors didn't understand was that a voice isn't just a sound, it's a vessel for truth. And when she finally used that vessel, not just to speak, but to declare a radical vision for a new world, the sound waves didn't just fill a room. They reverberated across a nation, shattering centuries of convention and proving that the most powerful weapon a person can possess is not a sword, but an idea spoken with conviction. This is the story of how one woman, silenced and shamed, found the courage to speak the words that changed everything. Hey everyone! If you're as fascinated by stories of hidden heroes and historical turning points as I am, please do me a favor. Take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this incredible story. Your support truly helps us bring these forgotten histories to life. To understand why her voice became so powerful, we first have to understand the silence she was born into. She wasn't just born into a world of societal expectations. She was born into a gilded cage. It was a beautiful prison, one of privilege and wealth, but a prison nonetheless. A place where a woman's value was measured not by the sharpness of her mind or the depth of her character, but by her grace, her beauty, and most importantly, her ability to remain quiet and agreeable in the presence of men. She was taught from an early age that a lady should be seen, not heard. Her lessons focused on embroidery, the piano, and the art of polite conversation, a careful dance of words meant to charm, not to challenge. Can you imagine the frustration of a brilliant mind, humming with radical ideas, being told that the most important thing she could learn was how to manage a dinner party? Yet, even as a child, there were signs. She would question the rules, challenge her tutors, and read books that were deemed unsuitable for her. These were the first tremors of a restless spirit, but they were quickly dismissed as youthful rebelliousness. Her unique voice, a higher pitch than what was considered proper, became a constant point of friction. Her family, well-meaning but utterly trapped by convention, saw it as a flaw to be corrected. They would urge her to speak lower, to moderate her tone, to soften her words. It was as if her natural sound was a defiant instrument, playing a tune that was out of place in the carefully orchestrated symphony of high society. But how can you change the very sound of who you are? This constant pressure to conform created an internal battle. On the one hand, she craved acceptance and the quiet life her station promised. On the other, the ideas swirling in her mind, of fairness, of equality, of a world where people were judged on merit, not gender, were simply too big to contain. The silence of that cage was not peaceful. It was a deafening roar of things left unsaid, and that roar, that pent-up energy, was just waiting for a crack to escape through. The moment she finally broke free from that gilded cage and tried to speak publicly, the backlash was swift and brutal. Imagine stepping onto a stage, your heart pounding, ready to share an idea you believe could change the world, only to have the audience mock the very sound of your voice. The media, in particular, had a field day. They didn't focus on her message, they focused on her manner. Headlines called her shrill and unladylike. Political cartoons depicted her with a gaping, squawking mouth. They said her voice was unfeminine, a grating instrument that was a testament to her unsuitability for public life. What they were really saying, of course, was that she was a woman who dared to have an opinion, and that was a threat. They used the sound of her voice as a weapon to discredit her mind, a tactic as old as time itself. She was essentially told that her ideas were invalid because they came from a mouth that didn't conform to the accepted feminine ideal. Her voice, her pitch, her very unique way of speaking was cast as a physical manifestation of her radicalism. The more passionately she spoke, the more the press fixated on this so-called discordant tone. It was a vicious cycle designed to wear her down and send her back into the comfortable silence of private life. But something interesting happened. The more they attacked her for her voice, the more it became a symbol. For those who felt marginalized, unheard, or trapped in their own silent lives, her so-called flaw began to sound a lot like courage. Her voice wasn't just her own anymore. It was an echo of every woman who had ever been told to speak softer, to laugh less loudly, or to simply be quiet. The ridicule aimed at her was, ironically, laying the groundwork for a far greater emotional connection with the people who would one day become her followers. While the public ridiculed her, something entirely different was happening behind the scenes. She wasn't an isolated figure shouting into the void. The very attacks she faced drew a different kind of attention, not from critics, but from kindred spirits. These were people who saw past the caricature and recognized the brilliance and conviction in her words. She began to meet in secret with other radical thinkers, often in quiet drawing rooms or dimly lit parlors, away from the prying eyes of the press. These weren't just political meetings. They were a lifeline. She found a community of individuals who didn't want to fix her voice but wanted to amplify it. They were writers, activists, and philosophers who were also tired of the old order. They listened to her ideas with respect, not judgment, and in doing so, they validated her. This was the true beginning of the movement. It wasn't born on a public stage but in the intimate, conspiratorial hum of a few determined minds. Together, they began to forge a new language, a language of equality, of justice, and of a future that seemed impossible just a few years earlier. They refined her arguments, built upon her vision, and helped her understand that her voice was not a weakness, but a distinctive instrument. They encouraged her to embrace the very quality that her opponents found so offensive. Think of it like a group of engineers deciding that a perceived flaw in a design is actually a unique feature that can be exploited for strength. This collaboration gave her more than just a platform. It gave her purpose. The constant ridicule had taken its toll, but surrounded by people who believed in her, she rediscovered her power. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was now the carefully selected, highly prepared, and powerfully supported spokesperson for an entire generation of disenfranchised people. They were preparing for a moment, a specific opportunity, to speak not just to the nation, but for the nation. The moment finally arrived. It was a seemingly ordinary political gathering, one of many scheduled throughout the season. But for her, and for the hidden movement she represented, it was the culmination of years of preparation and silent rebellion. She stepped up to the podium, and you can almost feel the collective intake of breath. The press was there, ready with their pens poised to mock her voice, and the establishment was there, ready to dismiss her as a fringe lunatic. But this time, something was different. She wasn't speaking to them. She was speaking through them. She began not with a fiery condemnation, but with a quiet, almost poetic description of the world as it was. She painted a picture of inequality so clear, so stark, and so emotionally resonant that it was impossible to ignore. She didn't use jargon or complicated theories. She used simple, powerful words that spoke directly to the everyday experiences of her audience. Then she pivoted. With a sudden surge of passion, her voice, the very instrument they had so long ridiculed, rose not in a shrill tone, but with a searing, undeniable clarity. It was in this moment that she delivered the lines that would be quoted for centuries. She spoke of a future where every person, regardless of their background, had the right to dignity and opportunity. She wasn't just proposing new laws. She was proposing a new morality, a new vision for what it meant to be a citizen. What made her speech so revolutionary was not just its content, but its delivery. She was fully, unapologetically herself. Her unique pitch and rhythm weren't flaws. They were the sound of authenticity. She was so earnest, so genuine, that she bypassed the intellectual defenses of her critics and went straight for the heart. By the time she finished, the room wasn't just silent, it was stunned. The air was thick with the feeling that something irreversible had just happened. A single voice, armed with nothing but truth, had just spoken words that shook the foundations of a nation. The immediate reaction to her speech was nothing short of explosive. The quiet stun of the room was a prelude to a national firestorm. It was as if she had dropped a match into a tinderbox. For the establishment, her words were a declaration of war. They couldn't just dismiss her as a shrill woman anymore. Her speech had too much weight. Their reaction was visceral, full of outrage and fear. Newspapers ran condemnations, columnists wrote scathing personal attacks, and politicians in power scrambled to contain the spread of her ideas. But for a silent, desperate majority, her words were a revelation. People who had felt voiceless suddenly had a champion. They heard their own frustrations and longings echoed in her voice. The speech was reprinted and circulated everywhere, in pamphlets, on street corners, and read aloud in union halls and community centers. It wasn't just a political document. It was a beacon of hope. What was once a small, secret circle of thinkers was now a rapidly growing, decentralized movement. The divide was sharp. On one side you had the old guard, terrified of losing their power and privilege, demonizing her and her followers. On the other, you had a new generation, inspired and emboldened, who saw her as a modern-day prophet. The nation found itself having a conversation it had long avoided, a debate about fundamental values and what kind of society it wanted to be. And at the center of it all was one woman and one speech. The fight was no longer about her voice or her person. It was about her message. Her opponents had made a critical mistake. By attacking her, they had made her a martyr, and by doing so, they elevated her ideas into a cause. Her once ridiculed voice was now the sound of revolution, and there was no turning back. Her supposed weakness, her unique speech pattern, became her greatest strength. What was once the subject of cruel jokes and media ridicule transformed into a powerful symbol. It wasn't a lisp in the medical sense, but a distinctive, high-pitched delivery that her opponents had seized upon as evidence of her inadequacy. But in the wake of her monumental speech, it became something else entirely. For her followers, her voice was the sound of authenticity. It was the antithesis of the smooth, practiced oratory of the establishment politicians who had nothing new to say. When she spoke, people weren't hearing a calculated performance. They were hearing the honest, unvarnished sound of a revolutionary idea. The very flaw her critics attacked became a badge of honor, a sign that she was one of them, an outsider, a truth-teller, and a voice for the marginalized. Think of it like this. A polished, perfect diamond is beautiful, but a raw, uncut stone with a unique sparkle can be even more captivating. That's what her voice became. It was raw, it was real, and it was unforgettable. It distinguished her from every other speaker of her time. Her distinctive tone became a rallying cry, a sound that people could instantly recognize and connect with. It was the sound of a new movement, and it was a sound that could not be easily silenced or replicated. This transformation was perhaps the most beautiful irony of her story. The very weapon used against her was turned around and used as the foundation of her power. She taught a nation that strength isn't found in conformity, but in embracing what makes you different. She showed them that the most powerful voice is not the one that sounds the most pleasant, but the one that speaks the most truth. As her movement gained momentum, so did the opposition. Her triumph was not met with acceptance, but with a fierce counter-assault. The establishment realized they couldn't just mock her anymore. They had to actively discredit her. What followed was a sophisticated and relentless campaign of disinformation and personal attacks. It was a full-blown war of words. They no longer just criticized her voice. They attacked her character. Rumors were fabricated about her personal life, her finances, and her sanity. They tried to portray her as a dangerous radical, an unhinged fanatic who wanted to destroy the very fabric of society. The media, which was largely controlled by her opponents, amplified these lies, creating a distorted public image designed to turn her own supporters against her. It was a textbook example of character assassination. This was a particularly dark and difficult period. The constant stream of lies and ridicule took a toll, not just on her, but on her family and close allies. Imagine waking up every day to new stories about you that are completely untrue, designed to make you feel isolated and powerless. But she and her movement had a secret weapon: the truth. They responded not with angry rebuttals, but with facts, data, and reasoned arguments. They trusted that eventually the truth would cut through the noise. It was a slow and grueling battle, but it was one they were determined to win. Her allies worked tirelessly to expose the lies, using their own underground networks to spread the truth. This period of intense conflict solidified the movement, forcing its members to become more organized, more resilient, and more committed to their cause. The attacks didn't break them. They forged them into a stronger, more disciplined force. So, what is the lasting legacy of a woman who was mocked for her voice, only to have it shake a nation? Her story isn't just about one speech or one movement. It's about the enduring power of authenticity and conviction. Her words didn't just win a political battle, they fundamentally changed the conversation for generations to come. The principles she spoke of, equality, dignity, and justice for all, became the bedrock of a new societal dialogue. We see her influence everywhere, in the movements that followed, in the rights that were won, and in the way we now think about who gets to have a voice. She proved that a person's worth is not defined by how proper they sound, but by the weight of their ideas. She transformed a perceived weakness into her most potent weapon, and taught us that what makes us different is often what makes us strong. Her voice, once ridiculed, became an echo of hope for every person who has ever been told to stay quiet. Her story is a powerful reminder that history is not just made by the powerful and the privileged, but by those who dare to speak up when everyone else is silent. It's a testament to the idea that a single individual, armed with nothing but the truth and the courage to speak it, can change the course of an entire nation. Her legacy isn't just in the pages of history books, it's in the voices of activists today who stand up for what they believe in, unapologetically. She reminds us that there is no such thing as a small voice, only a voice that has yet to be heard. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that the most revolutionary thing a person can do is to simply speak their mind, fully and without apology, and let the world deal with the sound.